Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. I hope everybody has had a good week. Hope everybody's enjoying their Friday morning. If you're rocking live with us, if you wouldn't mind saying good morning in the Toyota chat, throwing us a thumbs up, I certainly would appreciate it. A pretty loaded show this morning. We've got a lot to dive into. I will give some observations from spring football. I will talk about some potential breakout candidates on the defensive side. We highlighted some guys going into the spring, but now that I've had an opportunity to catch a couple of practices and get a little bit of a look at the team, we're still a long ways away from the reps that are really going to determine things in the fall. But I will talk about just kind of who is standing out a little bit, who we should keep an eye on going into the season, all that fun stuff. I'll play interviews with Jacob Ellis, the Iowa State transfer, and Andrew Laurich, who I think has an opportunity to be quite good for the defensive line this year. At the very end, I'll give a couple of thoughts on a Florida student reporter who seems to have generated a whole dialogue about the sanctity of journalism and what is appropriate behavior for a reporter and what isn't and all of that. I've given some thoughts on this before, but it's kind of a relevant subject in my life, given, what I do, but also it's something I've spoken about on campus a couple of times. I'm actually going to talk to a CSU journalism class about this exact subject next week. Shout out to our friend Daryl Blair. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to give a couple of thoughts on that, why it tends to lack context. I think there's a place for all in the gatekeeping that tends to occur from some of the more traditional capital J journalists. It just makes me roll my eyes a little bit, the way that they tend to speak in absolutes without giving some pretty important context regarding, the state of media in 2025. Anyways, I'll save that for the end. I don't want to ramble on at the beginning and bore everybody. If you want to stick around, you can. But at the beginning here, I figured we had to talk about the most relevant CSU news, which of course is Kyan Evans committing to North Carolina, blue blood bound. If you've been listening to the show, I'd made it pretty clear for the last couple of weeks that he was a hot commodity, that there were some pretty significant programs interested in him. His recruitment process was actually fairly quiet compared to some of the other guys that have been in his situation in years past. I know Missouri was interested. Obviously, Minnesota would have loved to have had him. Ultimately, it ends up at UNC. Major opportunity for Kyan Evans, although I'm not a big Hubert Davis fan. I'm a little skeptical of their, ability to keep things rolling at the high level we're accustomed to over these next couple of years. I do wonder if they're maybe in line for a coaching change at some point. But he did sign a contract extension not that long ago, so it seems like he's in it for the long haul. Obviously, a tough loss from CSU's standpoint. Sharpshooter, he was somebody that was overlooked by the bigger programs coming out of high school, despite being the Missouri Gatorade Player of the Year his senior year. Was a really nice find and a steal, honestly, for this CSU staff. Took a major leap in his second year in the program, which they needed him to go on this crazy run. I've made it pretty clear that I'm a big Kyan Evans supporter. I love watching him. He's got a great game. He's fun to be around. He's a good kid as well. But I'm not shocked, especially given the money that was reportedly being thrown around. I can't speak for him. I don't know exactly what he got in terms of NIL. I've heard some rumblings behind the scene. I think it was closer to 2 million than 1 million. I'll say that. I think he could have got about $1 million at Minnesota. I think he probably could have gotten, maybe 750,000-ish in Fort Collins, but that's speculation on my part based on some of the things I've heard behind the scenes. The point is, he wouldn't have been pushing pennies if he stayed at CSU. But also, there's levels to this and the type of money that he ultimately is going to be getting playing at UNC. It's not what he would have been able to get at CSU or even Minnesota. honestly, I am rooting for Nico Medved to have a lot of success in Minneapolis. I think it's going to be tough sledding. We've drawn the comparisons to Tim Miles at Nebraska. I think it's very applicable to Minnesota in the Big Ten in 2025. It's a place that at its peak has competed at higher levels than Nebraska ever has. There is a history there, although there was some cheating involved in their peak period. But I just think the disparity in resources between the programs like Minnesota and the Michigans and Ohio States of the world is going to be tough to overcome. And we're already seeing that just in this first recruiting class that Medved is putting together. He's done a nice job, and it's not surprising that Jalen Crocker-Johnson followed him. They've added some nice guys as well. Vahala, from San Jose State is an intriguing player, but they don't have the type of big checkbook that some of these other big programs have, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how they compete with that, how they're able to build their program, in spite of it. I'm going to be rooting for Kyan. I know there are going to be some fans that feel bitter, and I think their bitterness is probably more with the system than Kyan itself. I think most people understand his position and the chance to play at UNC. That's one of the premier basketball programs in the country in terms of exposure and playing on nationally televised games in the Tar Heel blue, the Jordan brand, everything that goes with it. On a human level, I think most people get it. Obviously, it stinks from CSU standpoint of they found this guy that bigger schools weren't interested in, and the minute he blows up, now they come a call-in and they write a check to basically make up for their poor job in earlier recruiting cycles. It makes it easy to overcome recruiting mistakes when you've got a blank checkbook. I guess I'll just phrase it like that. But I've expected Kyan to go big for a while. Admittedly, with how the Minnesota bloggers, not even the staff themselves, the bloggers and the fans had acted online over the past 4 to 6 weeks, it does make me a little bit happy to see them in shambles and to see how upset they are that they didn't get to poach Kyan as well as Croc. I've been asked if I was surprised at all that more players didn't follow Medved to Minnesota. Not really. They're probably realistically 2, maybe 3 or 4, depending on how he viewed some of the guys in the front court. 2, 3 guys that would have been able to translate, I think, at that level. And Croc and Kyan were obviously the biggest targets, the easiest, I guess, to project in terms of guys that might be willing to follow him. But with what Kyan did in the NCAA tournament, I said it that day, the price tag just went up. He probably made himself $1 million in that Memphis game alone. I mean, hitting 6 threes on that stage. This was all kind of predictable at the end of the day. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out down the stretch. I do wonder, going up against a different caliber of defender, although the ACC has been kind of down the last couple of years. Like, I don't think it's going to be this major leap in terms of the type of players he's going to be going against. Maybe more consistently, you're not going to have some of the games you get in the Mountain West against the Fresno States and San Jose States of the world. You're going to be going up against good competition on a more consistent basis, I guess would be the way to phrase it. But I mean, you see what he did in Viejas, you see what he did in the tournament, you see what he did in places like Albuquerque and Logan, and his ability to shine when the lights are brightest. I don't really have that many questions about his ability to translate in the ACC to have success at UNC. I will say that with the type of payday that guys like Kyan and all kinds of players, Donovan Dent, are getting, it is going to come with a certain expectation and potentially put some pretty lofty, just hopes on these players that are going to be hard to live up to. The expectation is going to be to deliver at a professional level when you're making that kind of money. And we've seen, whether you look at like Coleman Hawkins or Great Osobor this year, guys who got big paydays, and it was very publicly out there, they received some backlash when their team struggled. It does put a little bit of a target on your back. So I am curious to kind of see how all of that plays out. If he is not the type of player we saw in the second half of the season at CSU, I do wonder if the UNC fans end up turning on him just because it is a different level of expectation over there. I'm not rooting for that whatsoever. It is just something that could be a possibility, and it's one of the things these players have to deal with when it comes to NIL and these types of paydays. It just raises the expectation and the standard of what's acceptable. He's probably somebody who benefits from the market being so crazy right now. Like I do think the numbers have gotten so out of hand with some of these guys that it's going to help, some of these other guys get more money than they probably would have in recent years, and good for them. All the power to them. Also probably benefits from like where the market is at in terms of who is available. It cracked me up that Josh Pasquarelli was rated higher on 3 and 247, then all of a sudden Kyan commits to UNC, and then the rating flips for whatever reason. What changed in the last week about these players other than the flash and the brand that is now associated with one of them? I've talked to people that work for those recruiting sites. They claim it doesn't have an impact. We've all seen it play out so many times now. I have to kind of roll my eyes a little bit, but we wish Kyan well. He certainly was a part of a really fun season. I'm going to miss watching this team. I think he has the potential to be a legitimate superstar, and I think had he come back, would have been preseason all conference, a candidate for player of the year, along with somebody like Mason Fallslev, who's going back to Utah State, big time keep for them. We'll see. We'll see what happens. While it is a tough loss for CSU, I do think from a perception standpoint, with what the Rams have done over the last 5-6 years from a talent acquisition as well as a development standpoint, the reputation of this program is in a good place on a national level. David Roddy, Isaiah Stevens, Nick Clifford, even, Jalen Lake and John Tonje, the amount of guys that they've had come through this program and show huge growth and go on to accomplish big things, make it to the NBA. Tonje is going to be an NBA guy now too, and so is Clifford. So that's going to be 4 NBA players that have come through Fort Collins and just the last couple of years alone. Kyan might be an NBA guy too when it's all said and done. He's a little bit undersized at the moment, but he could put on some weight. He's certainly got the shooting and the explosiveness to play at that level. So we'll see. But I do think that while we have some very valid critiques of the system right now, and there are some things that need to be reined in with this whole process, I don't think CSU is in a bad spot in terms of how the program is going to be viewed from a recruiting standpoint. I think it's well established at this point that CSU is a place where players can come, they can develop, and they can get to the next level, whether that's a high major in Kyan's instance, or go on to the NBA like Roddy and Isaiah and Clifford are ultimately going to be able to do. I think that this program, a lot like what we talked about with Ali the other day, and if you missed that interview, I highly recommend you go and check it out. He was awesome. But like he talked about, the standard of the program has changed, and in part it's due to the type of players that Nico and Ali had been able to sign in recent years. The toughest part in terms of building your program is getting guys like David Roddy and Isaiah Stevens to come on board when you don't yet have that proof. You don't have the resume or the reputation of a San Diego State or something like that. And I guess if you've been listening to the shows for years now, you might roll your eyes a little bit because I've drawn back to this comparison so many times. But if you go back and look at the history of what San Diego State basketball was prior to Steve Fisher, it was a slow burn. They only had 2 NCAA tournament bids in his first 9 years in the program, no NCAA tournament wins, so CSU is ahead of them from that standpoint. But after that, they went on to have 12 bids over the next 16 years, multiple second weekend appearances, but it takes some time to build yourself up to a point where the expectation, the standard is that of not just making the tournament, but hopefully making a little bit of noise in the tournament. And that's kind of the position that CSU is in right now. You've gotten to 3 tournaments in the last 5 years. You've won an NCAA tournament game in back-to-back years. You're now a program that has some national association with, March Madness, with being a premier G5 mid-major type program. And you just want to make sure that after the floor has been raised, it stays there, and you're able to take things to the next level by continuing to invest, by continuing to try and go after, higher calibers of players and playing on bigger and bigger stages. And they're just in a really good spot. They're going to play in the Battle for Atlantis next year, which is a tournament with a lot of prestige. Obviously, they're doing a good job recruiting, and we'll kind of talk about that here in just a second in terms of where we're at from a portal addition and departure standpoint. We'll kind of put a bow on all this and talk about what some of the hopes and expectations are for some of these guys next year. Then we will transition over to football. I will play those interviews with Andrew Laurich as well as Jacob Ellis, get into some defensive standouts on the football side. Real quick, though, we do need to take a brief break and pay the bills. We got to shout out a couple of partners. So let's do that, and then we will move on. Between work, life, everything that gets thrown our way, it's a lot to balance. Coors Light encourages you to choose a chill mindset and to rise above. It's all about how we deal with things that get thrown our way. It's all about, having that right state of mind. Maybe you're supposed to have a barbecue, you run out of propane. What do? Order pizza and have a movie night instead. Life, when it gives you lemons, make lemonade, all of that, all the cliches that you're used to. Coors Light, when the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies, cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Choose chill this spring and then reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door. Visit CoorsLight.com/DNVR, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I also want to talk to you guys about Empire Today. Nobody does it better than our friends over at Empire. With Empire Today, you get shop at home convenience, the right product for your need, quick and professional installation, and a price match guarantee. Empire Today is the best place to find new flooring. There's copycats out there, but they can't touch Empire, not on their quality, not on their service, not on their speed. So what they do, they throw a bunch of junk at you. They try and overwhelm you with a bunch of choices and substitutes, but all of it is just junkier than the rest. Empire Today, they're the opposite of that. They're not trying to overwhelm you. They're trying to help you find what you need. And more importantly, they're trying to sell you the type of flooring they would put in their own home. Their virtual floor designer is a great way to see how new floors will look in any space. It's just super easy. Snap a picture, boom. What is this going to look like in my living room? What's this going to look in my bedroom? You got a nice little way to see. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can get a $350 discount. All they got to do is use the promo code DNVR. Restrictions do apply. See EmpireToday.com/DNVR for details. All right, we're going to move on to football here in just a second. So if that's what you're tuned in for, don't worry. We will be talking football. Have gotten some complaints from the football diehards that we've been locked into hoops more than usual. But the program is relevant, man. And that's what's cool about CSU basketball. I remember 10 years ago, the season would end, and obviously it was different. We didn't have the portal and all that. But you more or less didn't really think about hoops again until, like late September, approaching Halloween. And the fact that a lot like football, basketball now matters year round is a testament to, what has been built over the last 6-7 years. And hopefully they're able to take that foundation and go to the next level. Again, if you missed that interview with Ali Farouk-Manesh, go back and check it out. In terms of where CSU is at, as far as portal departures, Jalen Crocker-Johnson, Minnesota bound, following Medved to Minneapolis. That's a tongue twister. Kyan Evans will be playing in the ACC at UNC. Keyshawn Williams and Jaden Stepp are both TBD. Neither of those guys were surprising departures, though. Keyshawn, I imagine, will just be looking for somewhere where he can get more consistent minutes, have a larger role in the offense. I think he basically just would have been another 7th or 8th guy off the bench, a lot like he was this past year had he stayed at CSU. Jaden Stepp is somebody who came in with a lot of expectations based on his recruiting profile. Had been pretty clear over the second half of the season that it seemed like maybe there's a little bit of a disconnect there, and likely both sides would be comfortable with him, electing to move on. Reading between the lines, the fact that the staff wanted to maintain the red shirts of, Darnez Slater, John McConan, those guys, while they didn't prioritize it with Stepp, kind of shows you they weren't worried about, potentially losing that year there. You can't be, honestly, in the modern era, but I do think that was a a factor. As far as the additions go, Pasquarelli, Butler, the combo guards, both official. Pasquarelli comes over from Marist, 4-star transfer, combo guard with good size, gives you a couple of options to replace Jalen Lake. Based on what Ali told us, there is still a need for a point guard. You bring over Pasquarelli and Butler, who maybe at times could run the floor for you in certain scenarios, but probably closer to a 2 or a 3. Kerry Booth, probably somewhere in between a 3 and a 4, depending on who else is out there with him. You're obviously hoping that the guys you do bring back in the front court are able to make a leap. I think you've got a nice little intriguing group between Jorgensen and Japa and obviously Bemba. None of them are really traditional 4s or 5s. They're all a little bit unique. They all bring something a little bit different to the table. Japa, probably the closest to a traditional just rim protector big, a guy with size that you could put at the 5. Bemba, undersized, but man, is it big when he's out there. And Jorgensen, I think, is somebody who, as he grows defensively, his offensive skill is so significant. He's going to be such a natural fit in this offensive system. We saw he's not afraid of the moment, hit some big shots in Vegas, as well as the NCAA tournament and some of those conference wins. So I think all of those guys are intriguing. You're just hoping they're kind of able to take it to the next level there. And then you're going to need to hit on some of these young guys, whether it's JoJo McKeever, whether it's, Darnez Slater or McConan, who we've heard just has freak athleticism. Could he be a neat Clifford type replacement for you out at the wing? Potentially, maybe Slater is your starting point guard if you're not able to go out and get a veteran. I would say, if I had to guess, the starting point guard, probably not on the roster as of now. I know they're going to have some guys on official visits. They're talking to a D2 guy. They're talking to a Florida Gulf Coast transfer with really good size. I think he's like 6'5", 6'6". If you bring him in, all of a sudden the length and athleticism that you're going to be able to throw at teams is pretty exciting. But you're in a pretty good spot. I think after the first couple of weeks, I think it all played out fairly predictably in terms of the portal. Kyan was the flashiest target. He ends up at a big school. Kind of figured Croc would follow Medved to Minnesota, although you hoped maybe he would stick around. But Ollie's able to keep the foundation of some of the up and coming talent they have in Fort Collins, which is huge. And then you've got some other guys that'll be coming as well. McKeever is really exciting. Docker Tedeschi is a guy who's could be another diamond in the rough type find for you. Good size, good shooter. Probably gonna have to put on some weight, but all freshmen do. So that's where we're at with basketball. Could use another point guard, could use another wing. Feel pretty good about the front court, but maybe see how it plays out. If you're able to add another 4 or 5, why not? But I think getting a wing and a point guard are kind of your biggest priorities as of now. Let's switch over to football. We're going to play an interview here with Andrew Laurich. Then we're going to play an interview with Jacob Ellis. After that, I'll get into some more spring ball observations and all that. BFN had a nice day throwing the football yesterday. It was a little bit windy, nothing crazy like the day before. The tight ends continue to stand out. Jackson Warren had a couple of really nice catches in the open field. He's not fully cleared yet. He's in a red no contact jersey, but he is out fully participating in a lot of these drills, going up, catching the ball. He had one where Braden ripped it up the seam, hit him up the middle for probably 40 yards, but he just kind of threw it up, and Warren went up and outleapt the safety for it. You hear the DBs talking, and they're like, he's like 6'7". What are you supposed to do? But that's what's so exciting about him. Cracked me up. There's always, banter back and forth, but one of the defensive assistants said something along the lines of, oh, you can make plays like that. Why don't you take the red jersey off then? But it seems like he is in a good spot in terms of where his recovery is headed. As long as he doesn't have any setbacks, I expect him to be good to go this fall for fall camp. Him and Rocky Beers, I think they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets. And they brought over Carlos Anaya, I believe his name was, as well. Guy who's transferring up level, but he's got good size and he moves well out there. They've got some really intriguing options. They're definitely a little bit small at wide receiver. Losing LB was brutal. Kojo getting hurt in spring has been tough as well. Armani Winfield's not been participating. So they're a little dinged up at receiver, a little small. Jordan Ross looks really good. Tommy Maher is not just a feel-good story. I mean, he's doesn't look like he would be a starting D1 wide receiver if you saw him outside of his pads, but all he does is get open. He runs well. He's got good hands. I think he can be an impactful player for you in the slot. Love what I'm seeing out of the backfield. The O-line is more or less holding up. A lot of questions on defense still, and some of that has to do with injuries and just who's going to actually be participating. There's a lot of vets that are not participating at the moment, but I expect them to be in the mix. You know, Hector, I saw, was in a boot, I think, recently. Not sure what the deal is there. We'll have to ask Jay Norvell when we have our next opportunity. Sounds like Rogers, you know, the former four-star corner that came over, I don't think we're going to see any more of him this spring. So they've got some guys that they need to get healthy before fall. One of the things that's really stood out to me, though, just in terms of how practices have looked and maybe a dynamic that is a little bit different in 2025 than what we saw in 2024 and in years past under this Norvell regime, is that it's a little bit more all-encompassing. I think it's more inclusive with the way that practice is happening, just in terms of the offense and the defense collaborating together. You're seeing a lot more of that consistently than the offense and the defense working separately. Inevitably, there was always going to be some, you know, when you would do offensive versus defensive type situations, but a lot of it was groups, you know, that were kind of fragmented and everybody doing their own little thing in years past. And it just feels like across the board, there's maybe a little bit more continuity, a little bit more communication happening between those offensive and defensive staffs. It's year one, so maybe it's a bit of a honeymoon period. It's no secret that Norvell and Freddie Banks had serious issues, but that I think it was a bigger impact than we realized, and it really didn't stand out that much. But especially just seeing how things are going now from a communication standpoint, and seeing the way that the practices are kind of flowing, I do think having a head coach and a DC that are much more on the same page will be beneficial for this team. Now, how the results end up faring, we'll see. I think Tyson Summers is going to be a really aggressive defensive coordinator. I think we'll see a lot of pressure, a lot of blitzing, and that can lead to potentially erratic results if you're not fundamentally sound. You've got to have guys step up and make plays if you play that way. But at the same time, if you just drop back and go into like a prevent defense and in key situations, you're allowing the opposing offense to get in a rhythm and move straight down the field on you. And that was an issue for the CSU defense in the Banks era. We saw it repeatedly. We saw them blow leads. We saw them not able to get stops in key scenarios. And I think a lot of that had to do with just how vanilla they were approaching things defensively. They weren't willing to risk sending pressure. Maybe that's because they didn't trust the secondary. Maybe that's just because Banks likes to operate that way, a little bit more conservatively. But we've heard since the day Norvell came to town that they wanted to have a more aggressive approach on both sides of the ball. I don't know if we've ever really seen it, to be honest, on either side. But maybe this will be the year. Maybe 2025 is the year we see a more consistent, you know, vertical passing game with success, and a defense that is willing to play bump and run coverage and send pressure after the quarterback and do all the things that were kind of sold, you know, when the staff ultimately came over from Nevada. Like I said, we are going to play those interviews with Andrew Laurich and then Jacob Ellis. But let's just take a quick break real quick. Let's shout out our partners real quick so we don't have to do it in between the interviews. And then I'll get to those, and we will get into some breakout candidates on the defensive side of the football based on just some early observations. Again, I think you've got to take all results in the spring with a little bit of a grain of salt. There's guys that are going to be out there because of injury situations. There's guys that are going to be out there simply because you have so much time before the season, and you want to see them develop. You want to see them get reps. It's easy to overgeneralize or basically come to conclusions without enough information in the spring, when you're going to get a lot more accurate information come August. But obviously, we're all starved for football information, so I'll give you what I can, and we'll try and kind of look in the crystal ball of what to expect on that defensive side this year based on what we're seeing right now. Let's shout out those partners, though, and then we'll get to the interviews. Right. I want to talk to you guys about UC Health. UC Health, they're official partners of the Avalanche and the Broncos and the Rockies and everybody. There's nothing more than, living like there is a tomorrow. Sometimes I think we can be a little bit short-sighted. If you go to uchealth.org for more information, I want you to check out their Live Extraordinary plan. It's basically a way to help you be healthier, to live a better lifestyle, and to just make sure you're doing things right each and every day. So again, check that out at uchealth.org. Having trouble speaking at times today. Let's also shout out our longtime friends over at Game Time. Nobody does it like our friends at Game Time. If you're looking for tickets to Rockies, the Colorado Eagles, that's a hot ticket tonight. I'm going to be there for the potential return of Gabriel Landeskog. Fingers crossed, hasn't played since the Stanley Cup final, obviously. It would be electric to see him come back for the Abs and for them to potentially go on some type of run. The inevitable Disney movie that will come out of his comeback and just the work that he's put in is going to be epic. But whatever you're into, Avs, Nuggets, playoffs, Rockies, you can probably find awesome deals on the Rockies these days. Check out Game Time. The Game Time Picks feature is an awesome little curation function that shows you just the best of the best. The thing about Game Time is they have so many tickets, it can honestly be a little overwhelming at times if you're just trying to find a quick deal. Now at Game Time Picks, though, boom, going to show you the best that they have to offer right then, right there. They've got the lowest price guarantee, as well as some of the most flexible ticket coverage in the game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code DNVR for $20 off your first order. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, we've got some questions in the Toyota chat. Shout out to our friend Mile High Minute. We'll come back to that after we talk football here. We can talk a little bit more hoops. I have no problem doing that. I do want to play these interviews real quick, and then we'll get into some potential breakout candidates on the defensive side. But here is an interview with defensive tackle Andrew Laurich. I think he is in for a big year. Big, strong dude, has played his way into a rotational role the last couple of years, but they need him to really make a leap this season. And I think there's big things in store for the player they call Buzz because he gives everybody their haircuts. Seemed like the energy was high. Obviously, tempers flared a little bit. Got a little bit of a fight there. Just what are your thoughts on the effort that people are playing with?
I mean, we're starting to come together as a defense, and I think today we came out and it starts up front. The D-line, we're going to set the tone every single play. The rest of the defense is going to follow behind us, and we're out there having some fun today. So
it's a lot of new guys, obviously, on the defensive side. Just how do you feel like everybody's connecting early on here?
I mean, spring ball, you're always going to be light on numbers. You're always going to have to, get some freshmen coming in and transfers coming in. But we're two-spotting. Everybody's picking up the defense. Our new defense coordinator, Coach Summers, is a great guy. Likes to play chess with football, so he's a great guy, got a great scheme, stuff like that. So
how are things different for you within the scheme compared to what you guys were doing last year?
Whole different footwork, whole different hand placement, stuff like that. But like I said, Coach Summers is putting us in a great spot for us to get one-on-one blocks, for us up front to make plays rather than just jetting upfield and stuff and doing it that way. So it's just different schemes, stuff like that. So.
Are you trying to be more of like a vocal leader, just given you are one of the few guys that's back?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to be a leader. I was always a leader through high school, stuff like that. And now it's just earning my respects and then be able to become that leader. So,
what are your kind of goals here between now and the end of spring?
I want to be that. I want to be that guy for the D line. I want to be front and center for the D line. I want to be making plays. I want all the coaches to have trust in me and stuff like that. So,
what's your impression of Donut so far?
Great guy. Love him. Great guy. Brings attitude every day. He knows when to have a good time, but he also knows when it's time for business. And he's played some ball. I've seen him on film when we watch film every day. He's slithery. So
he definitely passes the eye test athletically.
For sure.
All right, man. Appreciate Andrew for giving us a couple of minutes there. Obviously a little bit windy in the background. It was pretty much perfect. There wasn't wind for 2 hours while I stood out there watching practice. The second I go to start the interviews, it kicks up. But I do think that everybody has enjoyed just, getting to know some of these players a little bit. They're not the most in-depth interviews, obviously, but just trying to give everybody an idea of who these guys are. And there's so many new faces on the defensive side. It's fun to give you a little bit of insight into that process. Here is one of the newcomers, Jacob Ellis, who was a junior college standout a couple of years ago, went on to Iowa State, where he was a part of their linebacker rotation and seems to be the solid replacement that CSU needed for Chase Wilson, who obviously went on to West Virginia. But here is Jacob Ellis, who told us he loves a little bit of Fort Collins hibachi. Just first things first, how are you adjusting to life at CSU and Fort Collins?
Man, the adjustment's been great.
Pretty good.
There's a great group of guys here. I've loved every single moment. It's a great team, great family over here.
What was it about CSU that appealed to you?
I would just say like the people, like how authentic everyone was. When I met with Coach Norvell, my sister was here on my visit with me, and we talked for about an hour and a half, and it was just so smooth, and I felt like I was just at home right away.
Is it, I don't know, I guess just from like your individual perspective, you're coming into a defense, but there's so many new guys. Is that kind of nice, just given that it's not like, oh, these are 10 dudes and I'm the one new guy?
Yeah, it is nice, having a lot of new faces in here. I feel like everyone's adjusted really well. I feel like everyone's, we're all getting on the same page, and I feel like we're like really close to being on the same page. But they recruited a great group of guys, high character guys, good in the classroom as well. So I think, when it comes to recruiting, it's about getting the right guys.
Yeah.
And, we have the right guys as players and on the staff. The staff they really care about as players, not just as athletes, but as students as well. So it stands out a lot to me.
What stands out to you about Coach Summers and just how he is as a coach?
He's just a high character guy. He brings the energy every day.
Yeah.
Very, very smart. Calls a great defense, and we just have to go out there and execute it.
It seems like it's going to be a very aggressive style defense. What is that more fun as a player? Like, how does this compare to what you've done in the past?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a more aggressive defense. We have some physical guys up front. Coach, like I said, he calls a great defense. So, we just have to go out there and execute it.
What's your favorite thing about Fort Collins so far?
I would just say the variety of restaurants.
I hear that a lot. What's your favorite spot?
My favorite spot. See, that's a tough one.
What type of food are you into?
I like it's a hibachi place. I'm not sure the name of it, but I've been there a couple times and I like it a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Shout out Jacob Ellis. I'll have to get the name of that hibachi grill. Love a little bit of hibachi myself. We're going to put on our green and gold tinted glasses here. I'm going to talk to you about why the future is bright for the CSU defense. This segment is brought to you by Shady Rays. Head to shadyrays.com, use that code DNVR at checkout for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Love Shady Rays. Been with us forever. They've got a little bit of something for everyone. But I really do appreciate those guys for giving us a little bit of their time, getting to know them a little bit. Obviously, I think as they get to know me and I get to know them, might let the walls down a little bit. There were a couple questions there. I was hoping both those guys would go a little bit more in depth. But that's on me. Sometimes I got to look in the mirror and be like, are you doing what you need to do as an interviewer? Just trying to get better one day at a time, right? We're trying to stack days here. Let's get into the potential breakout candidates for that CSU defense. And I think those interviews are a nice way to segue into things here, because I think Jacob Ellis is absolutely a breakout candidate for this defense. Not a surprise. One of the more highly touted transfers that CSU was able to add this winter, along with a couple of four-star corners, obviously, and Lewis Brown was supposed to be a big part of that class. Unfortunately, couldn't stay out of trouble. But Jacob Ellis, 6'1", 225-pound grad student, looks like a natural replacement for Chase Wilson out there. I think the possibility of having him and Owen Long be kind of your 1-2 punch there at the inside linebacker position should be something that produces, nice results. Owen is just a freak athlete. I love watching him fly around out there. Seems like he's poised to build off what he showed down the stretch. I don't have him on the list only because I think at this point, Owen Long is very much established, as is somebody like Aiden Hector or somebody, who was playing significant reps, at least by the end of last season, wasn't necessarily at the beginning. But Owen Long, he was a starter by the end of the year, and it was not surprising. I think that Ellis, he is going to have to stay healthy. That's been a little bit of an issue these last couple of years, and has limited his mobility at times. Based on what I'm seeing, looks like he's moving well. The instincts are there. Really smart player. And again, I think putting him next to an up and comer like Owen Long, who's really just going to cover a ton of ground, is going to be huge. And I like having that nice little balance of a raw up and coming athlete, somebody who's got great instincts, great potential, a higher floor in terms of athleticism, with somebody like Ellis, who's just played a ton of football over the years and, isn't going to be fooled by some of the stuff that gets thrown their way. Another guy who really stands out in terms of just the eye test is Kyan Evans. He saw the field quite a bit last year in a rotational role at defensive end. You love the frame, right? 6'4", 240 pounds as a redshirt sophomore, but he carries it well. Big, broad shoulders, long arms, gets off the snap quick. I think he's somebody who you'd like to see a little bit more consistency from in terms of their production in the backfield. He had 4 tackles for loss last year, but it did feel like he was a guy who, even if he wasn't necessarily getting credit for was in the backfield a decent amount. Like I think the opportunity for him to make a major leap is there, a lot like, in previous years, like with what we saw, with Mo Camara or even somebody like Boom Jack. Like the potential is there. You see the athleticism, you see the instincts. You just want a little bit more consistency now. The big thing for him is he's going to have that opportunity. There's a lot of reps that are up for grabs, just given the lack of continuity that you have in the defensive line. But again, I'm trying to go with guys that maybe we know a little bit less. We just had that interview with Laurich. He was, starting in the interior by the end of last year. He's not a breakout candidate because he is too established. Kyan Evans, however, is somebody who I think we see a lot more of this season. And I think he's somebody who could maybe be, kind of one of your star defensive ends this year. One of those guys who's going to put his hand on the ground. But I also think, he could be just a stand-up edge rusher with the way that he moves too, and in certain scenarios, maybe not quite as quick as a Kennedy McDowell or Jacob Evans, aka Donut, like a little bit closer to that traditional defensive end mold. But they're gonna mix things up in terms of the schemes they're throwing at teams, and you like guys that have a little bit of versatility to their game. And while it's a lot of unproven pieces in that front seven, I think they do have some nice positional versatility with guys like Agers, as well as Laurich and like Jack Moran. Jack Moran really looks the part physically. 6'6", 225 pounds as only a redshirt freshman, getting a lot of run this spring. Some of that might have to do with some guys being dinged up, but also I think he's going to be in the rotation for sure. Potentially the next great legacy Ram. We all love those stories. We just had the Howell era, and obviously you've also got Dagan Myers on the team, son of Greg Myers, but Jack Moran looks the part. I don't want to set unrealistic or unfair expectations. His dad was a legend. His dad has maybe the single biggest, most significant individual play in CSU football history. I mean, that scoop and score against Arizona in '94 to upset, top 6 team. One of the biggest wins of the Lubick era. It's like that or the head spike with BVP, I would say, in terms of like the 2 most iconic plays. Maybe also the touchdown throw from Moses Moreno to, I think it was Dallas Davis against Missouri in the Holiday Bowl. There's this classic stretch where Moreno just gets drilled. They're basically being like, I don't know how this guy can even stand upright. And then the next play, he manages to evade the pass rush and just throws a bomb to, I believe it was Dallas Davis. But I just want to like make that clear. Like, if you think he's going to be his dad day one, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. That's silly. But he is a guy who, he comes from great genes, obviously, which is a factor in all this. But on top of that, you can just see the instincts are there. You can see he's been around people who know the game at a high level. And I think in his second year in the program, there's an opportunity, kind of like what we saw with Tanner Morley last year, to take that next step and to be a solid player, and you love, that these guys are coming from Colorado as well. We talk so much about the local recruiting angle and being able to retain talent and all that. When you are able to hit on some of these guys from Colorado, the hope, there's no guarantee, but the hope is that, you'll be able to hang on to them a little bit easier. Moving to the secondary, and there's still a lot to be determined in the secondary. I'll say that. Like, I don't think I could confidently give you a 1-2 at corner. They're switching guys around a lot. Even safety, like with Hector being in a boot at the moment, I expect he will be one of your starting safeties. But two other guys I think you should keep an eye on are Jet Vincent and AJ Noland. AJ Noland, 6'1", 185 pounds, red shirt freshman, getting a lot of run of late. He moves well, was a two-way star out of Tualatin High School in Oregon. Actually really good friends with Jaden Stepp, who's leaving the basketball program, so I hope that doesn't incentivize him to maybe consider the portal later on. But I think there's a nice opportunity, given who was lost in that secondary, for him to earn his way onto the field, along with Jet Vincent, who, a lot like Owen Long, a little bit in a smaller capacity, but a lot like Long, earned more and more playing time as last season progressed. A really natural athlete. He's 6'2", 190, redshirt sophomore out of Grinnell, Kansas. If you remember back when he signed, his high school stats are freaking insane. He was a three-way athlete, ran track, played basketball, was also a football star, 3-time All-State selection in basketball, 4-time All-State selection in football, was 8-man. But I don't care. Those stats are insane. He had 307 tackles, 36 interceptions, 48 pass breakups, and 7 pick sixes in his high school career. He also had 131 catches, 2,500 yards, and 37 touchdowns on offense. He's just a football player. And he comes from a small town, small program, went under the radar, but he feels like a Sonny Lubick player to me, like some guy that just competes his ass off, is a sneaky under the radar athlete that maybe was a little bit light. Yeah, he was undersized when he got to campus, but he's now going into his third year in the program. He's filled out without losing any of that speed. He's got natural instincts and great ball skills. It wouldn't surprise me if, by the end of the year, we look up and Jet Vincent is somebody that is a big part of the CSU defense in 2025. But those are a couple of guys just to keep an eye on. Jacob Ellis, Kenyon Aggers, Jack Moran, Jet Vincent, and AJ Nolan. There's plenty of other guys we could talk about. Any of the transfers, CJ Blocker, how does he look coming over from Utah? Jahari Rogers, when he gets healthy, what is he going to look like at corner? Lamondre Joe, he looks the part from Missouri State. But all these guys are getting a lot of reps. So I am interested to see kind of who rises above in that group, along with, maybe like somebody like Chris Jackson, who got another year of eligibility because of the JUCO stuff, or is Dylan Phelps able to make the type of leap that I think he's capable of? He would not be a breakout star because we saw him flash last year. We know what he's capable of. But I think he's a guy that could be really important for you in the secondary. And I was really excited that they were able to hang on to him and Laurich. Those were two guys I really wanted them to be able to build around and just maintain a little bit of continuity. It's going to look a lot different on defense from a personnel standpoint, from a scheme standpoint, from everything they do. It's going to look different, but just having a couple of pieces that have been in the building, I do think it'll be beneficial. But yeah, that's where I'm at in terms of spring football. We've got a couple weeks here left. So we'll continue to keep you in the loop, talk about what we're seeing offensively, talk about, who's starting to, potentially establish themselves as a starter on the defensive side. But again, take all commentary from spring with a grain of salt. There's just so much time between now and the season. We're going to have multiple, portal cycles, and you've got freshmen that'll still come to campus, and there'll be transfers that have yet to be added. Like there's just still so much that needs to be sorted out between now and the regular season. And I know football is a 365-day content cycle. That is what we have created. But at times, I think we're putting too much stock in information that lacks context, which is, I think, a good way to transition here into our final segment before I get to some questions and comments from you guys in the Toyota chat. The capital J journalists are upset. There is a student reporter. Her name is Talia. I cannot pronounce her last name, but there's probably no sense in me even trying. Talia went viral a couple of times in March Madness for a couple of different things. But the most recent incident, if you can even call that is drawing criticism from some of the more old school media, was that when Florida won, a University of Florida student reporter recorded herself smiling. She didn't jump up and down. She wasn't cheering. She wasn't chest bumping. She smiled that her school won a national championship. I saw hundreds of tweets from various, types of journalists around the country condemning it. This is unacceptable. You've got to be completely impartial. How dare you violate the sanctity of journalism? And, we're all really important as basketball and football writers. We are just the most important people in the world, actually. And it makes me roll my eyes so much, guys. I don't get why the gatekeeping is necessary. I don't get why the nasty, condescending comments are needed. I'm somebody who grew up reading the newspaper every single day. I'm talking from elementary school through college, where I got the paper for free on campus. I read the Denver Post or the Rocky Mountain News, depending on, what subscription we had at the time, every day. I grew up on Sports Center and Sports Illustrated. I watched the nightly highlights on 9 News or Fox or whatever every night. That's how it was back then. But the world has evolved. We have so much more access to watch the games now than we ever did before. And it has changed what's needed at times from certain media members. Now, I'm not trying to get on my high horse and make it seem like what I do at DNVR is the only acceptable route. I think there's a place for everything. Kevin Lytle is one of my best friends. He is a more traditional, by the books print journalist, and I think he does great work. I think he's a phenomenal feature writer. I think he does an awesome job giving you guys day-to-day coverage and what works from a newspaper standpoint. Kevin understands that what I do is not what he does. We're able to recognize that. Crazy, right? We're able to coexist in the same media sphere. But for all transparency, like 10 years ago, the Coloradoan was a 4 or 5 man sports desk. The Reporter Herald, 4 or 5 guys. They're both 1 man desks. Newspapers are dying. TV news, it's decreasing. And I think a lot of it just has to do with how our consumption habits have changed. And the reason why it doesn't make sense for me to be a traditional by the books journalist, try and act impartial, play a part, that's what it would be. It would be playing a part, is that I am making curated content for diehards, for people that most certainly just watch the game live. Again, we have access to watch every game live. That wasn't the case even in the early 2000s. Not every CSU football game was on TV. In the 80s, 90s, beyond, most certainly was the case. There was far less TV. There was far less sports available to watch live on TV. Therefore, the need for a traditional impartial journalist to just tell you the facts and explain to you exactly how the game went was very much necessary, because people didn't have an opportunity to watch the game. The people that are tuned into this podcast, that are diehards, that are reading my written content, they were either at the game or at the very minimum were watching it live themselves. There aren't very many people, I don't think, that tune into me regularly that are not watching the games, that aren't aware of what's happening. And I just don't see what the value would be in me wasting my time writing just a traditional, recap. Here's the facts, nothing else, no commentary, no evaluation, nothing like that. That's not to say that there isn't a place for it, but I think talking about all of this and not adding in the context of how sports media has evolved, how consumption has evolved, how everything has changed in this industry, it just lacks a ton of context. And these old school journalists that get on their high horse and they speak in absolutes while, frankly, half of them are unemployed themselves, it really rubs me the wrong way, because we should be trying to build each other up. We should be excited that there are now more avenues to maintaining a career in sports media, because it's not an industry that as a whole is killing it at the moment, guys. Newspapers are dying. TV viewership, we're seeing it, how it's changing, even like with all the regional sports markets. Everything is changing. And I'm not for everybody. I understand that. But I do think that the way that I do things, which would certainly draw closer to this Florida, student reporter than like the traditional capital J journalist, I do think it resonates with a lot of people. And I think that your work can speak for itself. I think you can establish a reputation of being somebody who can be a straight shooter, who can give you honest and fair assessment and quality commentary about what they witnessed without pretending like I don't want CSU to win. Because at the end of the day, that would be me playing a character. And I find that a little bit ironic that all these guys that get on their high horse about the sanctity of journalism and being completely impartial, they all got into sports reporting at some point because they love sports too. And a lot of these guys that try and pretend like they are completely impartial, they're not. And I just think that all of it has gotten a little bit silly. I appreciate everybody letting me ramble about that for a second. I figured talk about it for a couple minutes at the end of the podcast instead of throwing a 5-tweet rant your guys' way. But that's where I'm at. Like I said, I think a lot of people that listen to the show, they get it. They're with us. They would be a little bit more supportive. I understand that there are levels to this. Like, I'm not going to be on press row wearing a jersey and chest bumping people. I got to act like a professional when I'm in that setting. But when I come on this show and I'm telling you guys like where I come from and how I feel, it just seems so silly to try and frame things as if I'm not a CSU guy. Maybe that's not for everyone. I don't really care if it is. Maybe there are some journalists that don't like the way we operate. And frankly, I don't give a shit. But I am tired of some of these guys that love to get on their high horse and act like they're better than everybody and condemn younger journalists who have come into an incredibly competitive world where it's hard to make it. There's less opportunities available than ever. And maybe if some of these guys would be willing to have a little bit more fun, take themselves a little less seriously, embrace their community and not act like they're so far above the fan that they can't even interact with them, let alone let it be known that they're a fan of sports themselves. Maybe some of these guys would have a little bit more success and their Twitter rants would pick up a little bit more traction because they'd have jobs and instead of having bios that say journalists for hire, because that's where a lot of them are at. Yeah, that's where I'm at. Let's get to some questions, comments in the Toyota chat, and then we'll get out of here. I know we've got a couple started behind the scenes. Mile High Minute says, now that Kyan is officially gone, what are your moves for point guard this upcoming season? They're talking to some guys from lower levels at the moment. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's Ali talked about it, point guard, it's hard to recruit in the portal, as are big men. Wings, two guards, a little bit easier to land from CSU standpoint. So you got to get creative, whether that be, going to the D2 ranks or, they're talking to a kid from Florida Gulf Coast or the junior college ranks or something like that. They've had success in the past getting guys like Cartier and Joel Scott who make the leap and then translate. Pasquarelli will be somewhat of a similar scenario coming from Marist. But if I had to guess, the starting point guard is not currently on campus, at least. Maybe is on the roster if you're phrasing it from a signing standpoint, depending on what happens with McKeever. My guess is you try and go find a vet that allows you to, get somebody like JoJo some playing time early, but ease him into the process and not put all of that pressure on him day one. If you are listening on TV right now, if you're watching via OTT, we are about to go to overtime. You can watch the rest of this show live on YouTube. If you're listening later on, that doesn't concern you, obviously. We've got another question here from Eric Simmons. He says, I think Colorado State men's basketball can compete for a Mountain West championship. What do you think? Sure. Yeah, I've got a lot of faith in the staff. I think that they've done a nice job of adding talent and filling holes of need. There's still a lot that needs to get sorted out. We got to see what some of these other teams look like. Utah State with somebody like Falslev coming back, I think is going to be dangerous. Boise is reloading. New Mexico, San Diego State, I firmly expect to be right there in the mix again. But yeah, I mean, I think the standard for CSU has been raised. I think the expectation is really every year they should be in the top 4 or 5 there and competing for the NCAA tournament. That's what we're hoping to see based on what has been established in recent years. Eric also says he thinks Colorado State football can make the Mountain West championship game. what do I think about that? We'll see. There's a lot of moving parts. I want to get a better look at what the starting defense is going to look like. I want to see the offensive line over a larger sample size. You've just got a lot of moving pieces there. But you've got a third-year starting quarterback. You've got a backfield that looks great. You've got a tight end duo that I think will be the best in the league. You've got a defense that is unproven but does look athletic. I think they've got better raw athletes top to bottom across the board than they have in recent years. Now the question is, how quickly can things gel? Can you win some potential swing games? Recently, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, I laid out the 3 games that I felt like would basically be the most impactful of swinging CSU season one way or another. And I pinpointed, games like Washington State and Wyoming and, Hawaii, Wyoming and Hawaii in the league slate of, you win all those games, you're probably in a pretty good position, but realistically you could lose, 2 or 3 of those games as well. And if you do, at that point, now all of a sudden the season's probably going a different way than you would hope for. Clint says, I'm a big UNC fan. Is Kyan actually 6'2" or much shorter? I don't think he's much shorter. 6'2" might be slightly exaggerated. He and I are probably about eye level, and I'm 6'1". So maybe a little bit exaggerated. That's every basketball listing. I kind of take all those with a grain of salt. Bowen Bourne was listed, I think, at 5'10" or 5'11", and that dude's like 5'8" on a good day. So sometimes it can be a little bit exaggerated, but I don't think you've got to worry about Kyan being too small. He's going to be a little bit undersized, but he is explosive. He's a guy who can be a 3-level scorer for you, and he's got great finesse. He's shown the ability to, go amongst the tall trees and be able to finish. So I think he's going to translate just fine at UNC. I think he's going to be a star. It'll be a little bit bittersweet, but I'll enjoy getting the opportunity to watch him a lot, given that UNC is on TV so much. That's all I've got for you guys. I'll have more, spring football content coming your way. We'll do a little bit deeper dive into basketball, what those rotations might start looking like. Once we get a little bit better picture of who is going to fill out the rest of the roster. Even then, a lot of that's going to be speculation until we actually start seeing them practice together in the fall. But we're almost to deep off-season mode. So embrace this last little bit here of spring ball content before we get into the depths of June and July. I did want to give you guys a heads up. We typically have 4 shows a week. While I'm doing some of the Avs playoff stuff here, at times might be more like 2 or 3 shows a week. And just in the off season, obviously, once we get closer to football and everything, we'll ramp it right back up, go back to the 4 shows that you guys are used to. But plenty of content coming your way. And I'm actually really hoping that I can use this summer to do some more long form storytelling and get some more written features for you guys. Shout out to everybody. Thank you for continuing to support the content. Much love, y'all. We are always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.